Today on episode 99, I'm giving you an update on where I've been since February, as well as an update on the future of the podcast.
Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, where we help new and beginning teachers navigate through those crazy first years of teaching so you can maintain your sanity and personal life. Here's your host, Kim LaPree.
Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kim LaPree, and this is the podcast for new and beginning teachers who don't want to just survive those first few years, but actually thrive. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I really appreciate it. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. You're actually coming at a really good time. And if you're one of my loyal listeners, welcome back. I know that it's been such a long time since my last episode, and many of you have reached out to me and asked, when are you coming back? I've had a lot on my plate and was going through some changes, which I'll discuss in this episode. And I couldn't find the motivation to keep recording. In the podcast world, we actually call this pod fading. In any case, I thought that you all deserved an update as well as my thoughts on how teaching has been this past year. So be sure to stick around all the way to the end because there's actually a lot packed in this welcome back episode.
Hi, I'm Batsheva Frankel from Overthrowing Education, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Can you guys believe that this is episode 99? When I really entertained the idea of coming back, I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. Episode 99. Okay, what do I do again? I literally had to listen to one of my episodes because I didn't even remember how I started and ended my episodes. It's been that long. And even now I'm trying to remember all of the things that I have to do to get the episode out, as well as I'm still trying to remember what I used to do to promote my episodes on social media. Some of you may have heard my special episode that I actually deleted. It was the one after episode 98, where I discussed hitting the pause button. I had just filed for divorce and had a million things on my mind to worry about. And I just didn't have the mental or emotional bandwidth to produce anything for you guys, especially since, in these episodes, I give so much. There's so much preparation. I really research and think about them, and I try to be mindful of what new teachers need at different points in the year. And so at that point in my life, I was just in survival mode, as you can imagine. And if you've been through something like divorce or you've seen your parents go through something like divorce, I think you can relate. Also, if you had some sort of trauma in your life, whether it is divorce or death in a family, I think you can understand how you have to refocus where you put your energy. It was hard enough being a good parent and still being there for my students. But to be honest, giving you guys the type of support that you deserve was just too much for me at the time. I had put my house up for sale back in February and then promptly moved out. We closed escrow the Wednesday before the lockdown on March 13 happened, which I think was actually no coincidence. I think that was just the universe saying, you're on the right track here. While it was a strange transition and time in my life, the solitude during the lockdown was definitely welcome. I really needed that time to process my feelings and figure out who I was. I know that sounds strange since I'm 42 and I should know who I am, but I think that when you're with someone for a long time, we were together almost 16 years, you sort of become a mishmash of who you are and who the other person needs you to be. And so as a wife, mother, and educator, those roles really defined me. But deep down inside, I actually didn't really know who Kim was, what Kim liked, what Kim was into. It was pretty sad. Distance learning, this is going to sound so weird, like hearing it in my head. Distance learning was probably the best thing that happened to me, both personally and professionally. I know that sounds strange since it's not nearly as effective as being in person. That much I will admit. but it really helped me reframe my priorities both as a person and a teacher. You see, once upon a time, I had to do everything as perfect as possible in my classroom. I had these really high expectations for myself as well as for others, actually. There were standards that had to be covered and material that I wanted to get through, and I assessed my own effectiveness as a teacher based on that. And I remember managing just about every minute of my workday. I've discussed this before, so that I wouldn't have to sacrifice too much time at home, which actually allowed me to pursue other things like this podcast. And I was just go, go, go with barely any downtime. And when I did manage to make time for my family, I was burning the candle at both ends. It was really frustrating. And I full on realized that I was doing this to myself. I'm not going to blame anyone else but myself. I really didn't need to do so much after school in terms of, finding things to do like the podcast, but I wanted to. I'm someone who thrives on working and accomplishing things because it feels good. In fact, I've been told before that I need to rest more and I need to find more joy. And strangely enough, I sometimes just find joy in work. Is that weird? Do you guys judge me? But during quarantine, I began to evaluate which things were really necessary and which ones allowed me to wear that quote unquote badge of honor called busy. You know what I mean? You just like to say, oh, I'm so busy. And it's just like, yeah, I'm busy. I've got things to do. I'm not just sitting around being boring and worthless. I'm busy. Because, during quarantine, I literally did nothing other than try to figure out how to get toilet paper. And also I spent time with my daughter. It was amazing. I had nothing to do and it was glorious. I started meditating, which is now a daily ritual. I was working out from home and I had no idea there were so many good workouts on YouTube. And then I was also finding recipes and cooking and baking with my daughter. We had gotten 2 new kittens before the lockdown, so it was fun watching them being crazy together. And overall, I was kind of taking like this staycation that I really, really needed. And when it came time for us to go back virtually, I wasn't worried or stressed out at all. Gonna full on admit, I wasn't freaking out at all. I had been so zen for those 6 weeks off that nothing really bothered me aside from my divorce proceedings, honestly. Those are always stressful. I decided that I was going to do something that was engaging with my students, but also allowed me to review important standards. We weren't supposed to teach anything new, so I looked at what we had covered during the year and then explored what I could do with my students that we would all enjoy. I'm kind of the mindset, if you guys have seen Fast Times at Ridgemont High, if I'm here and you're here, isn't this our time? And I started thinking about that. Why shouldn't I have fun too? Like full on have fun. So what we ended up doing was listening and analyzing the podcast called The Unexplainable Disappearance of Mars Patel. Now, if you guys haven't heard this, it is fabulous storytelling. Absolutely fabulous. I still love it. In fact, I'm going to be doing this with my students again right before we go on winter break. And the podcast was so engaging that I had quite a few students coming to class just for the discussions. Like these are students who normally wouldn't do anything in class when we were in person, and they were showing up for the discussions. And I have to admit, not all of them did the written work, but at that point, it honestly didn't matter to me. I was just happy for their company in class and happy that they were able to interact socially with each other. And, at this point, we already knew each other, right? Because we'd been together for over a semester. So the interaction was a lot easier. And during that first round of distance learning, I also reevaluated what I thought I needed to teach versus what the students really needed. And maybe you guys were in this situation too, if you'd been teaching for at least a couple of years. I used to think, those were the same thing, what I needed to teach and what the students needed, but they're actually not. Giving my students work didn't actually ensure learning. I know that seems obvious, but when your free time is precious and you're trying to uphold a sense of peace and order in your life, you're forced to really examine what this means. So I'll say that again. Just because you give them work that you think they need to do, that doesn't mean they're actually learning from the work or they're actually getting valuable practice from the work. So in order to protect myself and my time, I made sure that whatever I had them do was moving the needle forward. And I was so puzzled by all of the teachers freaking out on the internet in terms of distance learning. And I couldn't understand why they couldn't reframe what teaching and learning looks like and just make the most of it. That's actually one of the reasons why I didn't want to put out any episodes, because I couldn't empathize with you guys that were freaking out. I couldn't wrap my brain around it and give you any advice because I didn't know why you were freaking out. I hate to say that. Please forgive me. I guess during that time, during the quarantine, I just learned to let go of the unreasonable expectations that I had of myself. And this translated to how I taught and how my teaching actually changed. I realized that I wasn't less of a teacher because I wasn't teaching as if everything was normal. I wasn't less of a teacher because I had to cut out things that, in hindsight, maybe were just fluff. In fact, I realized that my students just needed me to be there and to have these academic conversations with them. They didn't need just like more work. So during that time, I showed up and I had fun with them. And in return, they showed up and engaged in conversation with me. It was very reciprocal. I didn't get hung up about the stuff that would usually bother me if we were having class in person. And again, this is actually one of the reasons why I didn't create new episodes during the quarantine, because I was having a different experience with distance learning than most. And maybe some of you are thinking, well, Kim, if you had said something like this, then maybe I would have had a different experience as well. And I realize that, and I feel terrible about that, because maybe if I had come out and said, you guys, it's going to be okay, maybe you would have realized that it's going to be okay. But that being said, there were also a lot of educational pundits out there that were putting out their opinions on distance learning and giving best practices on something that they had never experienced before. I mean, there were a lot of people giving out advice on best practices, and maybe those applied to purely online schools or just online courses that were self-paced in general. But you have to remember that in a lot of those programs, kids self-select into that, or parents self-select their kids into that. And we're trying to apply that model nationwide when we have students without the technology. We have students that are panicked and in fear without any sense of security, and their whole lives had been upended. They were all crammed together inside their homes, and we're going to say, well, it worked in this one sense, so we think it's going to work in yours. I don't know. I mean, I was looking at some of the advice that they were giving, and a lot of it to me was either common sense or I didn't think it would necessarily work, but they were just taking their best guess. So I didn't want to add to that noise, to be honest, because for me, I'm just taking my best guess and I'm just trying to adapt to what I had, and I was trying to make the most of it. So I don't know. I didn't want to add to that and create any more confusion. And honestly, if I had told you how great the experience was for me, I think you would have been kind of bitter and probably tuned me out. Just my best guess right now. So let's fast forward to this past school year, and it's been more frustrating, actually, which you would think would be easier because I have practice, right? But here's the thing. First semester, or the first time around, we had the technology. The kids already had their iPads, for example, and we had been using technology for a while. So I was able to train them on that in person. But this school year right now, I am teaching students how to use technology while they're actually on it. And when I can't look over their shoulder to figure out what's going on, I can't look over their shoulder to see which steps they skipped. And it was so frustrating. I mean, also the disparity between haves and have-nots became really glaring when it comes to things like internet and a suitable location in their home to learn. I mean, we had time to prepare for it. They had time to prepare for it. And after all of this time, there still were so many students who couldn't get good internet. They were just hotspotting, and it was really frustrating. For whatever reason, I don't know. I think because we just accepted that this was going to happen and we didn't have enough supplies during the quarantine, we just sort of like forgave everything. We were really easy on the grading. And maybe I was just in denial about it. I don't know. But the second time around, it just seemed more glaring because I feel like my district or companies like the cable company, the internet companies, they should have worked together in the community to make this less of a problem. Also, since I didn't know these students, they weren't as open to discussion as much. I mean, nobody wants to show their camera, which, I'm fine with now. I'm not going to ask them to do it. They don't need to. I get it. It's uncomfortable and can be embarrassing depending on your living situation. And sometimes when they unmute, I know why they don't want to show their camera because I can hear what's going on behind them. So that one's fine with me. But at first it was just kind of like, I feel like I'm on a YouTube live stream or something, talking to the abyss and just seeing comments in the chat. So the first few weeks of school, they were definitely frustrating, but I have to say that things are so much better now. I get at least 95% of my students attending daily, and for the most part, they're getting the work done. Yes, of course, I still have students that are not coming at all, and I have students that are failing, and I have gone to great lengths to get them caught up. There's only so much you can do. I'm also continuing my philosophy about teaching from the quarantine days. I take a hard look at what I normally teach, and then I pick out what is truly important. I want to maximize the amount of time that I have with my students since right now our classes are limited to only 30 to 45 minutes long. That's what we were told. And each block only sees me 3 times a week. So I have to make sure that in that amount of time, I'm getting the maximum impact. There is no fluff. There is no extra whatever just to make sure that, oh yeah, I hope you got it. Let's practice some more. No, every single minute I'm working. And I also don't assign too much homework because I know that some of their other teachers aren't adhering to this and they're piling on the work. I don't want to be another teacher doing that. So I've been focusing my energy planning lessons that really move the needle, that will set up my students so that they're going to be ready to hit the ground running in second semester. So I'm preparing them so that when we go back in person, I'm pretty sure we're going to go back in person. I'm confident about it. Then we can hit the stuff that maybe we had missed, or I can actually just look at second semester a different way and focus on getting a little more advanced on the skills. So I wanted to make sure that I'm giving them the baseline now so that we can expand upon those when we get back in person. I'm also focusing on material that would be relevant to the students and highly engaging. Like in my mind, I'm constantly thinking, is this engaging to students? Some teachers are like, I don't care if it's engaging, we have to do it. And I get it. Maybe like certain parts of history, students don't like it. But there's definitely a way you can teach it in a more engaging way than just lecturing. I mean, I have a lot of students coming to class, but it's harder for me to hold their attention because there's so many distractions that they have at home. You're fighting against those. So why shoot yourself in the foot by just giving a boring lecture like you normally would? Find a new way to deliver it so that they want to stay engaged with you. They want to block out distractions instead of playing Among Us simultaneously on their phone. So yeah, I intentionally select topics and texts that are of high interest, and I keep our discussions entertaining. Just a little unknown fact, I talk about food a lot, and that gets the kids going, especially when there seems to be a lull in the conversation because they love to talk about food. Anyway, I also realize that I can't reach everyone and that there are some things that are truly out of my control. And I realize that we've become kind of desensitized to the growing number of COVID cases every day. And at the time of this recording, we've hit over 100,000 cases in one day. So I think some of us have also forgotten that these students and their families, they may have contracted COVID and they don't want to discuss it. So that could also be another barrier to them being successful in your class, or a barrier to them even showing up in your class. In fact, I had some students tell me about this when we were having a class discussion because we were discussing the yellow fever of 1793 because we're reading this novel. And one student asked to unmute, and he shared how his mom recently got COVID and how hard it was on his family. And oh my gosh, you guys, then a lot of students wanted to share about their families and COVID, and it really hit me like, okay, this virus is really rampant. It is still really affecting my community. So I keep this in mind with the students that aren't performing as well as others, because not only are they not able to get the kind of individualized attention that I could get them in a classroom setting, like when they're working and I can crouch down beside them and help redirect them, they're also dealing with uncertainty at home. So in terms of the future of the podcast, it's important to note that during this year, I've been exploring what I want to do with my life. And honestly, I've had serious thoughts about leaving teaching. It just hadn't been as fulfilling as it used to be. And I felt like there was something bigger for me. I was getting this itch to do something else, something more where I could help more people. I mean, I love to teach, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I only have to teach middle schoolers. And I did a lot of exploring with other careers and trying to figure out what would make me happy, while also allowing me to make the same, if not more, amount of money. But every time I deep dive into something, I would get this gut feeling that it wasn't right for me. Time and time again, I'd get excited and I'd want to sign up and take a course or certification for something, only to find myself feeling like, I don't think I'd be happier in this. I think eventually I would get really bored and want to leave. So I finally decided that I would keep teaching because, number one, I'm good at it. It's just easy for me at this point. And number two, these kids really, really need me right now. It would be unfair to leave them even at the semester, but I would try to find other ways to scratch that itch so that I could find other ways to help people. So what I did was I started a YouTube channel called Your Own Damn Way. And I'll leave a link to that in the show notes if you'd like to go check it out and watch my first couple of videos. In the same way that this podcast has helped so many of you, I want to help others who also realize that their life wasn't fulfilling. People who realize that they had been living their lives based on other people's expectations. And I really want to take people on this journey to their dream life, to achieving their dream life, so that they're both financially secure, but also emotionally fulfilled. So my plan is to do both the podcast and the YouTube channel. But truth be told, I'm going to be focusing more on the YouTube channel at this point, since I'm super motivated. It really lights me up and I'm just starting it. So I want to get it built up and get some momentum going on that. So I'm trying to put out 1 to 2 videos a week, as well as do things like sell merchandise and other things like that. But I'm also going to create episodes for this podcast, although it'll most likely be every other week or once a month. So I'm not going to be putting out as many episodes, but I'm not dropping the podcast. I don't want to leave you guys hanging, especially so many of you have been so kind to reach out and tell me how you binge these episodes. Now, you know this, I don't have all the answers or even best practices for making distance or even a hybrid model work effectively. I only have what I do in my classroom. And from speaking to my colleagues, what I do mainly seems to work for me because of my personality and teaching style. So if it doesn't align with how you deliver your lessons, it might not work. But I'll continue to be honest and upfront with you, and I won't try to sugarcoat anything ever. You know I don't do that. You've been through a lot this year, and you deserve not only my support, but also my transparency. And if what I'm producing in my episodes doesn't resonate with you, I really need you to let me know so that I can make sure that future episodes are helpful. But in any case, I am back. And you guys, the next episode, it's going to be episode 100. What? I need to do something special. I don't know what. It's almost like too much pressure because it's such a milestone. I don't know. Maybe I'll have like a Zoom dance party or something. I don't know. But I feel like I need to go do something major because it's episode 100. In any case, thanks for hanging out with me today and for coming back. I've missed you guys. I would love for you to check out and support my new YouTube channel, Your Own Damn Way, which again will be linked in the show notes on whatever device you're listening on. If I can get that channel really going and get a lot of subscribers and views, then I can keep teaching and keep the podcast going. So once the YouTube channel gets easier and I get some momentum going, then I can kind of spread my energy a little more. Thanks for hanging out with me today, you guys, and have a fabulous week.
Thanks for listening to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast. Love this episode? Head over to Apple Podcast or Google Play to subscribe, rate, and leave a review.